Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone. I am incredibly excited to invite you and have you join us for 2021 Vision Week. This is a full week of sessions about annual planning, ranging from today's amazing topic on making sure that your tech stack is really ready for what your team is going to accomplish in 2021, all the way through from new ways to deploy go-to-market messaging, and finally rounding out the week with some conversations about territory design, compensation, and joke writing and the role of comedy in sales. If you have not yet started annual planning, you are in the right place. Hang with us all week, and we're going to take care of all of the challenges that you face. Vision Week wouldn't be possible without an amazing set of sponsors, and I wanted to give a personal thank you to the teams at SalesLoft, Concert, IntroHive, Lean Data, Zant, and Zoom Info. Without their sponsorship this week, these amazing panelists, the content that we've put together wouldn't be possible. So thank you so much for all of these great organizations for sponsoring 2021 Vision Week. And for our attendees today, just a few housekeeping notes. Please do use the Q&A panel. You can submit questions there. You can also comment and upvote others' questions. So if you see something that looks interesting, throw a comment on there, be like, ooh, me too, and also give it an upvote. And also, for those of you who are just getting situated in your 2021 Vision Week, please go ahead and join the Slack channel. This is where you're going to be able to interact with the team at MSP, our panelists for all the sessions, and other attendees, all in real time. So today is Tech Stack Tuesday. We've got a few sessions today. This is the first about getting your tech stack ready for 2021. And later on this afternoon, we have a session about the future of sales and revenue operations. I'm really excited to introduce today's moderator, Venki. Venki has been an amazing MSP member, and I'm going to hand it off to him to take us through our session today. Venki, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Richard. Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to MSP Vision Week 2021. My name is Venki. I'm super excited to start off this amazing week ahead of us, which has a rich agenda for 4 days. A little about me. I work at Facebook, leading analytics and business planning. I joined Facebook in December of 2019. And prior to that, I spent 5.5 years at Salesforce running sales and go-to-market strategy. I live in a town called San Carlos in the Bay Area in California with my wife and a toddler. I'm sure a lot of us are neck deep into annual planning for 2021. Being the very first session, we are starting off with what is on top of the mind for pretty much anyone in this community. It's top of the mind for me in the community. Whether you are in a sales-facing role or you're in biz ops or in marketing, there is this one golden question as you think about 2021 is my tech stack ready for 2021? For something that's relatively an open-ended topic, we hope to leave you with key insights from our incredible panel of speakers and would love for them to introduce themselves. Maybe we start with Jackie Leahy.
Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Jackie Leahy. I've been in the tech sales sort of world for about 5 years, first as a BDR and then kind of being a team lead and then manager and then director of business development. I found my way to the back end of Salesforce simply because I probably cared the most about our tech stack. If it could be broken, I would break it. So it just happened sort of organically. And I love Salesforce and tech stack so much that I ended up being a Salesforce consultant. So now I get to obsess over tech stacks and plumbing and ops 24/7.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jackie. Hey, Gabe, you want to introduce yourself?
Always, yep. I'm Gabe Larson. I'm the Vice President of Growth for a customer out here in New York City. It's a customer service CRM. And prior to that, I ran marketing and business development for InsideSales.com, now renamed as Zant. But excited to be here today and talk 2021 planning.
Wonderful. On to you, Debbie.
Hi, everyone. I love that we get to talk to you guys about tools, the very first session of this week. I am a business operations consultant today, but I've come from a long line of both large and small company operations, largely focused around sales operations. I live in New York. I just found a deep passion for this work my whole career in some element or another, and I'm just really excited to join forces with these other folks on the panel today.
Great, and then on to Ryan now.
Good afternoon and good morning. My name is Ryan Morrow, and I'm the Director of Sales Development at Cybrary. Cybrary is actually my fourth startup. So there's just something about being at startups and early stage tech startups specifically that draw me in. I can't seem to leave. And much like Jackie, 10 plus years ago, I started out as an SDR or BDR and worked my way up. I frequently call myself a career SDR, and I like to figure out exactly what makes everything tick, from pipeline to show rate to demos completed and shown. So I'm excited to bring some of my ideas to you guys today.
Cool. All right, so we move on to our very first topic of discussion, which is principles of great CRM data hygiene. Now, data is such a critical DNA of any organization. It's important to its success. Typically, organizations with a strong data quality and governance framework enjoy the fruits of an intelligent sales and territory planning process. So with that in mind, I think what's pretty important for all of us is really understanding the foundation of any pursuit that we undertake, which is principles of great CRM data hygiene. And to start off this discussion, we can get started with Ryan, who can share some perspectives from her experience on dealing with problems in data and how she went about fixing some of them and the observations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Venki. Around Cybrary, I'm famous for saying we don't have a lead problem. We have an organizational problem. And what's unique about Cybrary is that we have so many learners coming to our platform that we're getting roughly 15 to 20,000 inbound leads per week. So we didn't have an actual process for data hygiene, for sorting this data and then routing it to team members. It became such a time suck and a bottleneck and a manual process that we had to turn to tooling to get this straightened out. And the first place that we actually looked was at Lean Data to get our leads not only round robin, but it also implemented a speed to lead protocol for the SDRs. We actually, with implementing this one tool and straightening out what our issues were, it was completely invaluable to myself and my team as well, just on time alone, because as I said, it was a manual issue. And there were so many disconnects getting the right leads into the correct hands and then filtering out what we didn't want to put the SDRs against. So bad data was driving poor results for our team. And when we were able to clean that up, we were able to make great data-driven decisions. And again, the tool became invaluable for us. And I can talk a little bit more about that when we get into tooling.
That's super helpful. That's a great segue to our other discussion point, which is really acquiring the data, the decisions that go before you acquire the data from external sources. So to that note, let's hear from Debbie.
Yeah, I would say one of the chief frustrations I've had with data acquisition is that there are so many different players in this market, and it's really difficult to differentiate. And I think one of the things that I've learned is there is often a good solution for your need, but it's very difficult to, like, I wish they would all aggregate and combine forces, because the expense you have to go to acquire data is really overwhelming. And in some cases, I've had to go in and rip out all the data that exists because there was such distrust of it and duplication of it in our systems. And then one data vendor that you would find was really good for one thing was actually not good for another thing. Like, for instance, direct dial phone numbers, their email connect rate might not be really high. And so it really does take a strategy across a couple of different data providers. And I think, Gabe, when we were talking about this earlier, you were saying that you guys experimented with some stuff. That's part of the thing that is so important, is experimentation and working with these vendors to get some sample data and really start to feel it out, because until you can do that, it's very difficult to make the right choice.
Right, and if that choice goes wrong, then the whole point of matching intent with all of the investments, that can be pretty disconnected. And Jackie has some great perspectives to share to that note.
Yeah, you can't take your data casually. It is serious. It's expensive. Prepare your stakeholders that getting data is going to be expensive. It might even be more than your Salesforce subscription, right? Like, but especially if you're doing anything outbound or anything where you have to confirm inbound leads, that data is going to be absolutely crucial. And sometimes, like Debbie was saying, you need more than one source. But get clear with your leadership team and make sure everyone on your team knows, like, what data points are the sources of truth, right? So if you're running territories off of location, then what field from what source is like the final say on that? And so, like, I like to say, like, knight your data source, knight those sources of truth.
Absolutely. I think one of my experiences has been that as much as you can take a data-driven approach for pretty much any initiative or any program in the company, there is always this element of market feedback. You have to listen to your stakeholders. So it's pretty important to find the right target audience and curate the data according to what they need. And Gabe has pretty interesting perspectives on how to like handle those disconnects between the audience and the people really taking decisions centrally on the data.
Yeah, one of the advantages of coming from the marketing side is, and I think sometimes we miss this on the sales side, having played on both, is just a real robust understanding of your target audience and persona identification and the segments you're really going after. And oftentimes, I do think we start with kind of the tools, and that's just general. So we go to these different data providers and try to get answers from them. But man, you've got to, I think, start on your own side, and you've got to figure out your who. Once you do that, man, I have been burned multiple times on data providers, echoing some of the other people. I went with maybe bigger names in data. And I said, well, these guys must have just a good breadth, but didn't really take the time to do 2 tests. And I think they're easy, they're small tests. One is letting your BDR team, your SDR team, your sales team play with the data for a little while. They're such a great resource to figure out, is it actually getting who you want to get? Let them play with it and they'll figure it out. 2 is just running an A/B split test. Get 1,000 records, shoot emails off to them, watch the bounce rate, watch the response rate, see how many emails are good, not good, for that target audience that you define. Find ways to actually test it, because I'm always surprised, and I think we are finding this more and more. There are new data providers, and some of them are more niche. Some of them may have actually closer to your segment or your audience or a particular industry. And maybe that's a better way to go, but just relying on a vendor to start is probably not going to get you where you want to go.
Absolutely. Also, what is important is really understanding the scope of data acquisition. A lot of times, what in my experience in the past, we have ended up making these blanket purchases and with little or no ROI. For example, we send 500,000 accounts over to this vendor and only maybe 10,000 of them needed cleansing. So some upfront preparation on what is your scope, how much you need to limit to, which is also what justifies the investment in the space of data hygiene. All right, with that, let's speak about another pretty foundational element, which is tool evaluations and this whole point of preventing tool creep. Data being foundational, it can also be only as good as how effective the tool that consumes the data, that helps you prepare the data, that helps you analyze the data is. And if even that middle layer can go wrong, it can significantly hinder all of the progress that you potentially try to make with annual planning. So to understand the role of the journey or the customer journey map in identifying gaps and prioritizing the right technologies, let's start off with Gabe on that.
Yeah, I've been guilty. I think everybody probably on the panel, if they were honest, would probably admit that they've bought a shiny object, right? So fun to get Gabe all the new tools. and play squirrel. You know, it's like this tool will, the system will save me, but systems aren't saviors. That's something I've learned the hard way multiple times in my past. And one of the things I've even appreciated more here at Customer, you know, we're at kind of an omni-channel customer service CRM, and one of the things we do for our clients is journey maps, and it's very big in the CX and CS space, and something I picked up, I think, a little bit in my Accenture days as well. But man, if you start with that, if you walk through the journey of a customer from demo to how many fields you got to fill out, and then the average or the speed from, you know, how fast you're getting a response, and what those email templates look like, and what the actual lead status or contact statuses are, and how a BDR interacts with you, and you experience that, and you put it on a wall, you put it in Lucid, you put it in Excel, you put it in PowerPoint, put it somewhere, print it out, put it on a wall, and you will have the best conversation you've ever had. Oh my goodness, well, I didn't realize we had such a gap there. You know, we need lean data here. Oh my goodness, our cadences are terrible, so maybe we need a Xant or you know, some tool there. But once you have the process and you identify the gaps, then you can have a conversation about tools. And again, I'm bad at this because I like to buy as many tools as I can. The more tools I have, the better I feel about myself. But if I can just bring it in, get that process map, have a real conversation about it, I've just found that we can actually get to a place where we have the tools for problems rather than kind of doing it the wrong way. So definitely a recommendation on my side.
That's such a good point, Gabe. And to that note, I think what's also pretty important is how we prioritize these investments. Once you lay out the map, you're going to have different stakeholders throughout the company who are going to say, hey, I need that tool and I need this one too. And each tool or each vendor in this market solves one niche problem or the other. And it all in the end comes down to the prioritization. And Debbie has some interesting perspectives to share from her experience on how things could go wrong if tooling decisions are not prioritized.
Yeah, I think, I love the journey map, Gabe. It's such a healthy way to look at it. And then you really also realize the sort of web that your organization has woven over time. Right. And it really is accretive, and it starts to be just a total nightmare. And it's very expensive, not to mention, just really distracting from a team perspective. But my experience is, and maybe some of you guys can relate to this, is that sometimes sales leaders are the worst buyers. They are really good about the shiny ball, and they come in and say, oh, we have this amazing tool, and we have to have it, and or they get it before you do, and before you come, and then you have to go and clean it up. And so I would say one of the things that I find immensely helpful, but can also be a risk, Venki, to your point, is you oftentimes have multiple stakeholders who need a tool for different reasons. Yes. And your scope creep can go crazy, and your evaluation process can be so long. It's interesting, like Concert, when you think about it, at one of our sponsors, actually, they have a very interesting approach. They're really good for ops people. They're great for the back office finance folks, the ASC 606, but they also really help sales leaders think about performance. And so where you start to see these marrying of multiple stakeholder value, it's amazing, but I would still caution you, be careful, because it can then become a very, very complicated evaluation process that gets too many stakeholders involved.
Yeah, is there a specific story you would like to share, Debbie? We've all been in the middle of such nightmares with having to go back and clean up fields, clean up tools. There would be a specific experience.
Actually, I made a very bad purchasing decision, and it's one of those that I regret. And we bought an analytics tool when under one set of sales leadership, and within about 6 weeks, we were actually going through and implementing this BI tool, and we were all ready to go. On the ops side, we loved it, and then we got a new set of sales leadership. Had a very different perspective on how to, and even our company had a very different perspective on how to sort of like count booked revenue and how we were going to measure it. And it basically blew up our whole implementation. And at that point, our service hours were gone. and we had to reconstruct it ourselves. So we, in effect, only used it on the back end. It never came to fully to fruition and us getting the value from a company perspective out of the tool.
Absolutely. That's a great story. You've had pretty nightmarish experiences as well. There was one point of time about 3 years ago when we went and made a big investment on Anaplan. Hey, a great tool, been around for a while, pretty mature. But what was important is that we prepare our data accordingly. That would be in a format that Anaplan would ingest. And it's important that we do that because you're talking about complex territory models, which need to be at the level that the tool expects. And when you don't do the prep, then things could go south. And then we ended up finding us in a position where we had like a 2-week turnaround time to complete all of the annual planning, all of the territory segments out, comp out. We ended up doing everything in spreadsheets. So it's one of the pains that you have to deal with when prep is not done in an enough way. So on to Ryan. She has some great perspectives on how we can divide and conquer and have like a task force to evaluate these tools. Would love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I want to say Debbie's 100% correct. If you can't find someone to sell to, just sell to a sales leader because I will buy. I definitely chased the chasm and went after all the shiny things. But we kind of had to really reel it in and learn the hard way. We started out with base CRM and we went from base CRM to Salesforce. And then we also added on Marketo. We also added on Pardot. So we had all these fancy cars that basically nobody knew how to drive. And we wanted to be bigger and better. And by doing that, we kind of shot ourselves in the foot. You have to be able to walk before you can run, and you have to be able to run before you can sprint. And we went from a crawl to a sprint, and we fell down a lot, but we learned from it. And some of the things that we really learned from it is one is build an internal task force, which from all the way down from individual contributors to the highest stakeholder, as Debbie was saying as well. But make sure you're not getting too many hands in the cookie jar because it can get confusing. And everyone tends to have a very differing of opinions. So it does get a little bit confusing at times. But I will say one invaluable lesson that I learned was listening to the squeaky wheel. And the squeaky wheels were always on my team because they were the guys that were getting their hands the dirtiest inside of these new tools. And something that we bake into any tool evaluation process is that we get at least a couple of weeks to test drive these fancy cars before we actually make a purchase. And then something else that we did, and again, I can't stress this enough, is that we actually used to use Eustace Consulting as our Salesforce consultant service. They're amazing, by the way. Kudos to Jackie. But what I will say is we brought a Salesforce consultant in-house. When we purchased Lean Data, I got Lean Data certified. We needed to be able to have skin in the game to run our tools effectively the way that we needed to run them. We needed them to work for us and not the other way around. So my best advice is understand what problems you need to solve and get all stakeholder buy-in before you even start sourcing. Once you start sourcing for new tools, make sure you're evaluating at least 2 tools. And then from there, make sure it's actually going to effectively solve your problem and you're not just grasping at straws to get a different tool in place.
Perfect. I would like to share a little bit of my experience on how we approach this. About 4 years ago, we instituted something called a data governance council, which brings all of the key stakeholders in a room for making key decisions around data management or changes or tooling decisions. And we had people from sales, supporting roles, finance, marketing, ops in the room. And we kept the audience pretty tight. And the decision was that, hey, this central council represents the voice across these stakeholders. So right from building that customer journey map to understanding how are we going to go about campaigning to save a specific field or retire a specific field in our CRM systems, or whether it's prioritizing these investments to buy a new tool. So this central task force was put in place, and they were the people who were making those decisions too. So to Gabe, Debbie, and Ryan's point on, hey, drawing out the journey, identifying the right stakeholders, and figuring out a task force to evaluate the tool, something like this could be pretty helpful. But one thing that's super important is, regardless of all of that, there is always this temptation of buying a tool. There is something that comes up. A vendor shows up for a demo, and often we are challenged with this question about, hey, is this the right investment? Is this the right time? So we would love to hear from Jackie on what that evaluation looks like.
Yeah, you want to make sure that your evaluation team, like Ryan was saying, has the end users, the squeaky wheels, the grumpy grumps, the people that if you don't get their authorization, you're probably going to crash. You're not going to get the ROI out of it. So you really want those whiners, in a good way. And also listen to what they're saying. Even if something that they're saying sounds like very small, because I remember when I was a BDR, and probably the biggest pain in the butt to our sales ops person, just because if it can break, I would figure out a way to break it, not on purpose, I tell you. But we were evaluating InsideSales.com, one of our sponsors now, and I had a complaint about how the emails were looking, and it to this ops person, it seemed like not a big deal. It could be fixed. It wasn't a big deal. But me as the end user I wanted to see that fixed before I could buy in, right? So sometimes from our point of view, it's like, oh, something's small, but it's something that is their world. Like, we're just implementing a tool, but that's their day-to-day reality for eternity. Okay, maybe not that serious, but it feels that serious when that's what you're working with. That's like your physical life.
Yep, with something that's serious, I think it's super important that we also hear about examples on how significant this can be. So for attendees, it would be great if we can all share our learnings around a failed implementation, a prep that we completed, and our perspectives on whether this includes change management from the very start. So Gabe, probably we start from here. We start with you on your learnings of a failed implementation, and how did you go about rectifying subsequent decisions?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, now that we are where we are, I'm forgetting who said it, but I love this: try before you buy, or crawl, walk, run. If you come across a vendor who's not willing to do a pilot or some version of that, I just don't deal with them, because I love this idea of crawl, walk, run. I've always found when I go big and try to implement everybody at once, it just doesn't work. I really got to find that speed team. We've always called it a speed team, and it's these SDRs or salespeople who are they're just more open to change. They're kind of those people who are always pushing the buttons. And again, I'm reiterating some of that other people said, but if you can find a group of those, and if I can separate them from their current team, put them in a different building, or separate them, away from the crowd, but you need that group who can kind of just quickly iterate to figure out, okay, how do we get this, what's working, what's not working. Once you nail it, then you can scale it. And then you can kind of run it to other teams. So boy, I'm a big believer in getting that rep buy-in. I think that's one of the big things companies are missing these days, is the buying circle just got a little bigger because the reps have the most power. So 1, you got to get the reps. 2, you got to then try the technology. And then 3, you got to nail it and then scale it. Get 5, 10 people, get it good, iterate, and then push it out to the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
Gabe, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about an implementation. So we were implementing outreach, and first to just the BD team, which was just me and I think one BDR at the time, loving it. I set up all these like automatic things, so we were just crushing our days. And it was working so well that the AE team was like, well, what about us? Why are we left out? And I was like, okay, great. Let me turn it on for you. oh my gosh, was that a poor approach? Like we did not walk before we ran. We just turned it on for them. They're like, why am I automatically emailing these people? Like this doesn't work for me. And it was like it it it, it was like war, but what's that musical? The Sharks and the Jets.
West Side Story.
West Side Story. It was like West
Sharks
Side
and the
Story.
Jets.
When it didn't have to go like that, right? So like if we had really thought about it, oh, we're expanding this to a different team, they probably have different requirements and wants out of it, right? And really think about it, get that user authorized testing in, even though we already did it. You still got to patch test it and adapt it to another group, or you will get yelled at.
Don't want to be yelled at.
Don't get
Yes.
yelled at.
Because once you make a decision to invest, you got to maintain it. And then you got to make sure that everything that you put in makes sense and is sustainable. I think to that note, we have a very interesting question from the audience on how to make sure that SDRs and AEs keep the CRM up to date. And what have we tried across our organizations to achieve this? And I can chime in here. We did a bunch of things. We obviously enforced system and governance limits on who can access, who can edit, who can enter. We also had a support team offshore who would proactively and meticulously come in and clean up all of the data. We would provide stats on, hey, how bad is the situation here? How is bad data hindering your sales planning? How much time are we spent investing in just doing cleanup? And that's a lot of productivity. And we could be doing something totally different, which is such as making these amazing tooling decisions or drawing out the customer journey map. And all of that spare time is being invested in the cleanup, which is not pretty cool. So I think you could do a couple of those things to make sure people really understand the value behind entering in quality data. Any perspectives from folks would help. Maybe we start off with Debbie on your experiences.
Yeah, I would say I've gone the full gamut of these responses to this. One is having AEs go in and clean stuff up. It was a disaster. First of all, it's just a really expensive way to clean data. But secondly, it's just not the right approach. And I think part of it is incumbent upon us to build systems that people believe are additive to their day-to-day and not just a management tool. And it's a very hard thing to do. But if we build the practice and the discipline of it, and you have the support from the sales leadership who's using that tool all the time as their reference point for that data and that information and not taking other sources, it's actually a really helpful, that's been what I've experienced as the most helpful. Obviously, there are operational things that Venki sort of described, but I think there's a cultural piece to this, which is critically important. And if you don't have that leadership buy-in, it's very, very difficult. I actually had a president of one organization who was like, I literally will not look anywhere except for Salesforce to get this information. So Debbie, you guys build solutions that the team can use, and I'm only going to look there. And I loved that. It was amazing.
No, I visibly got triggered when I heard this question because I was like, I've done everything just short of beating people into submission. And how many times have we heard, if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist? So to Debbie's point, 100%. I've done everything on my end. I've done making every single field essentially validated in Salesforce to lock down those fields where you can't convert a lead to a contact unless all information is in place appropriately. I've also tied people's commission to it essentially. So like if all of your ducks aren't in a row and I have to go back in and I have to triple check what you're supposed to be already double checking, then you're going to get dinged on commission for this. Short answer is there's no perfect way to do this. But again, to Debbie's point is you have to create a culture of this at your company and hold people accountable to that. I do the same thing. If people are like, oh, I emailed them and I'm like, well, either you didn't CC me and it's not in Salesforce. So it literally doesn't exist. It's in the abyss somewhere. So you need to go back to the drawing board and make sure all of your ducks are in a row and everything is buttoned up in Salesforce.
Wonderful. With those two foundational topics on how important is data and how important is the whole process of tool evaluation, we now move on to something that's that we all care about, which is, are we getting the most out of our stack? Are we getting the right return on the investments that we have made? And we measure it very differently. Sometimes we measure it in terms of some sort of an indirect revenue attribution. Sometimes we measure it in terms of employee productivity. But would love to hear from some of our amazing panelists on their experiences on how did they go about understanding, are they getting the right value out of the tech stack? And for that, let's hear from Debbie on how your experience has been from your leadership team.
I think this goes back to our sort of earlier conversations of, if you're getting the right set of requirements and the right understanding of the business problem you're trying to solve with this tool versus trying to jam a tool down people's throats, one of the things to do is to say explicitly, how are we going to measure the success of this tool in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? It's hard, and then sometimes in 6 months. And I think the more you can plan up front, and it's so hard to do this, especially for really lean organizations when you're running as fast as possible. Sometimes you're looking for a solution, a savior solution, which generally never is. Take the time to do the planning and really think through conscientiously about what results you want out of it and what you think a successful install looks like, and from your business leaders, what that looks like as well. And I think that's just additional buy-in from the leadership that's really important. And it's going to make them think and slow down a little bit and not say, like, you're just going to, I need you to fix this. It's going to make them think a little bit more about what does good look like?
And if people are not bought into it, you run into this classic adoption problem. Like, you make a major investment and it just winds down over the next couple of years. And then that becomes one of those, garbage cleanup activities. Like 3 years down the line, a new leader comes in and then it's all about like phasing things out. So it's also important that you get leadership buy-in to continuously drive the adoption, roll out the most effective change management practices, enable people who are supposed to use it across the organization, almost to a point where something that is as critical as, let's say, the foundations of an opportunity or a deal pipeline, it would almost be a part of sales onboarding, that, hey, this is something that you're going to use day to day. And while you ramp up, it's important that you know how to do this. So to that note, Ryan has some great perspectives to share on how you approached, top to bottom approvals and buy-in from the leadership level to ICs.
Absolutely. And I will also say probably the single biggest thing that I look for when I implement new technology. And I said this at the very beginning, I usually come into early stage startups and help them build out their sales team, is I have to have something that's scalable. It's going to be able to grow with us, and it's going to be able to inherently absorb a lot of our growing pains as we get bigger as an organization, but I would say, going back to what we all said earlier, is develop a task force that you want to assist you in making the correct decisions. And again, before you even go into the task force, make sure that you fully understand the fundamental problem that you're trying to solve, and make sure anything that you're looking for can actually do that for you.
Absolutely. And then, as important as all of these efforts behind adoption is, there's also a fair amount of handholding that's needed, enablement that's needed. And as much as the brain power that goes into curate and identify and find these tools, it's also important that this team comes together and invests the right amount of time in enablement, which could be setting up office hours or doing recordings and stuff like that. And Jackie has some great perspectives to share on how you can enable people to adopt the tool.
Yeah. So one of the benefits of bringing in those squeaky wheels into the fold of the evaluation is often they will become very passionate champions for specific tools, and it's going to come across as way more powerful when an end user is helping train and get buy-in on a new tool than, you know, the ops person or even the VP of sales or something, right? Like, this is actually your peer using this tool successfully. So at LinkSquares, my last company, my first BDR was Claudia. She's now running her own BDR team, but I brought her into all the evaluations, and not only would she totally get it and help me figure out how to implement it, but she would also find all the little hacks and tricks and everything that she was actually using on our prospects and getting success. So having her just help people do trainings for either for onboarding or just spot help, right? Side by side. I got a question about this, I have a question like this. Instead of it all coming to you, you'll have like your agents in the field who are way better at that, because they're actually using it day to day, and capture that, right? So like take screen recordings, record that training that they're doing, set up some office hours. So it really is as impactful as possible. Like, you don't need to, definitely you have to train everyone, but you don't have to physically do it all, right? Yeah, and if you can't find a champion for that tool, like maybe it's not a great tool.
Yeah, takes me back a few years ago when Salesforce acquired Quip, and that immediate annual planning cycle was when we had a mandate on, hey, we should transition success plans for AEs onto Quip. We should give them a real-time performance report. We should have them fill out their strategic accounts and everything that they are going to achieve and hit those targets. It was a big lift, I must admit. But hey, being the ops stewards, a bunch of team members came together, architected how this is going to be applicable for an AE, how the user experience is going to pan out. And we gradually, slowly, steadily over the first couple of quarters, onboarded, transition, moved AEs over onto leveraging Quip as their primary go-to interface for entering their success plans. And then onward, we also wanted to make sure that, hey, this adoption doesn't wane out. We need to up the game on the adoption. So we started including those as part of their career quarterly conversation. So in addition to attainment, when they talk about metrics, it's also about their success. So you almost have to make sure that sales leaders and reps really understand that any investment is something that's been made for their success. So that value proposition to the target audience is super important here. Any examples from our panel? Probably we could hear from Gabe on any examples on how you quantified that ROI for the target audience you're making investments for.
Yeah, you know, I do think there's some tools that are very easy to get ROI on, and there's just others that aren't. And so I think you do have to separate that, right? Like a sales engagement tool, I think that's fairly easily trackable. There may be some that are a little bit harder. So I would try to separate that and then have two different conversations. You know, one of the things that I found in trying to get the most out of your stack is just being honest with yourself. And especially as we talk about annual planning, it's going through and doing that tech audit where you do just go through, and we try to do it once a quarter. And it's much like going through, I literally just did this yesterday, going through your wardrobe and throwing out clothes that, you know, you just got to be honest with yourself. Like, I'm not going to wear this, or I don't need this feature. I don't need that piece or that tool set, or, I mean, unfortunately, and I think
it might not spark joy. You have to Marie Kondo.
Or I gained too much weight in COVID.
Right? Yeah, it's so hard. But I just feel like SaaS is behind in a lot of ways. You know, the Salesforce model of a per seat license, I do feel like in a lot of cases it's becoming archaic. But a lot of us who have that model, and I say that, you know, with a smile, we love when people get 50 seats and they maybe cut 10 people, but they still have 50 seats. Or we love to sign up with, you know, a company because they assume they're going to scale to 100 seats, and then they're paying for seats that are unused. Guys, you cannot pay for unused licenses. And so there are technologies out there. We use one called Tori. you got to monitor it and do an audit every quarter. Just what are you using and not using? What features are you using or not using? And just be honest with yourself and just start cutting stuff. And I think that's a way to get your ROI tighter, because you just don't have that kind of tech creep, because you've just been honest with cutting stuff.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I was just going to say, sorry, just to
Yeah,
jump in
go ahead.
on everything that Gabe is saying. So for clothes, the rule of thumb is if you haven't worn it in 3 years, you're tossing it. Same thing for us, Gabe. If you haven't used it in 3 months, you're tossing it. And so
That's hardcore.
Yeah, if you're going through it every single quarter, I mean, if you're paying for a tool that you're not getting anything out of, what's the point of keeping it around?
Yeah, we just have, yeah.
Absolutely
Well,
cool.
so-
So let's hear this from our audience. We would love to get some of your thoughts flowing, and would love to get a little bit more around real life examples on what we could share. So submit your questions via the Q&A panel, and you could also comment, and we could get some of these discussions rolling. So let's talk about one of the very interesting questions that we have from the panel, which is getting detractors on site is a huge win, especially if they're influential. Let's talk a little bit about vendors who are offering best practices for getting buy-ins. In our experience, what we have seen is vendors a lot of time come in and they're less empathetic towards whether this is truly bringing in value for the organization. Have we been seeing vendors more and more in having that empathy on, hey, let me first try to see if I'm able to solve this person's problem, and then we can talk a little bit more about what my product can offer. Hearing from you, Ryan, would be helpful on how you've approached some of this in your experience. Have you come across this?
To be honest, I haven't come across this as much as you would think. I think when we actually rolled through this previously, I think, Gabe, you had some pretty good points to this. I would love to defer to you.
On what was the question? Sorry, I was listening to your response. What was it?
Sorry.
Yeah. The question was, have you come across vendors, or what's your perspective on vendors who are empathetic towards bringing an ROI truly for the organization versus just selling a tool and like walking away?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't think there's a lot of companies who, one, have ROI built into their platform, and shame on us that we don't have it. Two, I do think you're getting vendors who are a lot more open to having conversations around what is right for the customer rather than holding everybody to a contract. And so if they're not willing to partner with you, I think you got to hold their feet to the fire. And then three, whether it's like a monitoring tool, like I told you, like Tori or something, you just have to run your own business, and you have to go back to these vendors and say, hey, I know I bought 100 licenses, but I'm only using 75. The 3-month rule that Ryan said, we totally live. I think that's awesome. I'm adding and cutting Asana licenses all the time. Marketo, sales engagement tools. I hate this per seat. I hate the per seat price. I'm looking forward to the days of Slack, the usage-based pricing. I think many SaaS companies are recognizing is a little more innovative, but so I think you're not going to get it from the vendors, you guys. It's just not, unfortunately. I'm sorry, we just don't have it. A lot of us vendors. You got to find the ROI, and you got to hold these people, hold the feet to the fire to make sure that you get it. You get the ROI you want.
That makes sense. And we are slowly, steadily, increasingly seeing that vendors are, in fact, being vested in solving the problem. They start with pilots, they do some measurable results. But again, it's a food for thought for all of us as we are into that business to think more about the ROI. It's all about the customer. To that note, we'll start off with this question. Ryan, you say that we typically would ding commissions for not properly converting lead to contact. Does it mean that a clean opportunity from creation to close is more worthy? Is that cycle end to end a lot more worthy?
Yeah, so what I meant by dinging commissions is at the end of the day, when I'm tallying up closed won deals, is the Panda doc signed? Is there an attached PO? Is everything properly outlined in Salesforce? Are all of your emails in there? Is your handoff form from the account executive to the CSM properly annotated with a pay meter challenge where the CSM could pick up in a seamless way? Are all of those things in there before I press send on your commissions? And if not, we're going to go back to the drawing board and figure out why and have that done. And if you miss commissions this month, essentially, because you took too long to get all those things done, then we'll back pay you for next month, but it's a must have in month. And it might seem a tiny bit aggressive, but my job is to foster the correct behavior. And unfortunately, we had to go there. And to use your words, Gabe, we had to hold people's feet to the fire.
Yeah, I think the level of rigor that you put in really depends on how deeply rooted a specific tool or a capability is. If something that's super important for calculating commissions, then that really requires a lot of serious thought and adoption and deep vested interest into that specific tool. But what is also important is we understand from our stakeholders on whether the tech stack is valuable for them. To that, we have an interesting question from our attendees on what are our thoughts on doing a tech stack survey to the sales team to obtain their feedback on the tools we have, any enhancements that they would like to see, what's confusing, because it's all about our stakeholders, our customers who are going to be in the end consuming all of this. We'll start off with you, Jackie, on your thoughts.
Yeah, I love this idea. So my last company was a startup, right? So I was hire number 10. So at first it was like, hey, do you like this tool? Hey, do you like this tool? Cool, we're good. Do you know how to use it? Good. But then all of a sudden we're like 30 people in sales and you can't get everyone's attention at once. So I absolutely love the idea. I think I was using Typeform just for very informal, just surveys. And it might kind of match the maturity of your organization as well. Like if you're a bigger organization with more bureaucracy, maybe it's a formal like sales tech stack NPS basically that you do once a quarter or something. But I think I was doing like a question like once a week or something, like how do you feel about this? But I absolutely love that idea. And first, so you can kind of benchmark your satisfaction with your customers and how impactful you're being. And that can always help you justify more headcount or more budget for your ops, being like, hey, everyone needs this. And you're gonna have some blind spots that like, oh my gosh, apparently that big training that I did on the Zoom Info LinkedIn tool thing, actually nobody knows how to use that. So let's go ahead and let's do a mini training at the next sales meeting. Also, I'll do a little screen recording and I'll link it right in Salesforce homepage so they can just watch it and fix it, right? So it's like those little itty bitty pivots or so you can just get so much more ROI and your end users are going to know how to use things so much better.
Yeah, one more thought on that, because I don't love that idea. The survey concept, and the problem that I've found when I've done surveys is, and I'm a salesperson at heart, but it's like they always want the shiniest tool, so they never want the cheapest tool. They never are happy with the tool sets, and I'm not saying you can't handle good feedback or real feedback, but oftentimes I've found that, the tool is almost less important than the implementation of that tool. There's a lot of tools that I do think are, truthfully, they're pretty similar. But, a lot of us get an idea in our mind, like this company's the best. So if we're not using that, then I'm just not going to participate. And so I've found sometimes that the survey concept can be very misleading. I have preferred to find like the champion concept. And I don't know who mentioned that, but if you can get this like close group of people who are the power users, and they're the ones who can kind of decipher and be like, hey, truthfully, John Doe, he never uses the tool anyway, so he's just going to complain always and say that this tool is crappy. What we really need is X, Y. You got to be able to just be weary of cutting through the real feedback and the feedback that is just sales feedback, which is, I can't hit my quota because I don't have the right tool. I don't have enough tools. I don't get this. I don't get that. So be wary of that feedback, because I promise you'll get a lot of that coming through the survey.
That is awesome. And we take one of the other questions that's from our attendees is how and under what circumstances have we set up a tools governance committee for adoption and optimized use? What are some of the best practices? I think regardless of a very specific investment or a decision, I think this idea of a committee is a great idea. Whether we talk about data cleanup activities company-wide or org-wide, whether it's about approaching the way we address territory models, I think having a governance committee is a great idea. To Gabe's point on, hey, let's get that well-rounded feedback from our stakeholders, and let's hear it from them on what a decision like this would solve in terms of the day-to-day operations.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Venki, did you, how successfully did that go initially when you did that versus did you have to adapt stuff over time?
Yes, it was over time. Everybody thought that idea would be like a classic analysis paralysis where too many people come together, too many cooks in the kitchen. However, we started seeing material ROI. The biggest immediate ROI that we saw was we enforced quite a bit of limitations on who can access and who can input. That materially helped us with a much lesser or a much less stressful data cleanup exercise as we went into annual planning. One of the things that we've always done is before you go into annual planning, you do this massive sweep of territory cleanup to understand what the true customer disruptions are, because accounts and the firmographic information that grows over time. Companies mature from small businesses to mid-market organically. Companies do get acquired where a small company can suddenly become part of this enterprise umbrella. Sales leaders love to see beforehand what the disruption is. They love to understand what are the accounts coming in, what are the accounts going out. And those decisions are only as good as the fundamental data is. So this governance committee came together to institute so many foundational principles on cleanup that we immediately saw the ROI from at least that rigor standpoint in the very first cycle. And then subsequently, it was more of an organizational change where we started having checks and balances in place for newer implementations, new tool purchases, and so forth. All right, cool. So folks, I think you had a very productive discussion, but we want to make sure we leave our attendees with some tweet length takeaways on what we have learned from our experiences and something that would be really effective for our attendees to take away with. We start with you, Ryan.
Oh man, tweet length. I think I've already used up half my 140 characters. But I would say the biggest takeaway for me is make sure that your data is clean and make sure that you have confidence in your reporting because it allows you to make decisions faster. And then the second thing I will say is scalability. Make sure whatever tool that you're implementing can scale with you as your business grows.
Cool. When we move on to Debbie to hear from you.
I would say start with the process, not with the tool.
Right. How about you, Jackie?
I did it. Everyone, yeah, I did it. Know the champion for each tool. That one person that is a total fan who can run trainings, ad hoc help, and just run helpful tips. This person will help you get so much more out of your tech spend. And if you can't find one champion, it might be time to walk that tool behind the shed.
Makes sense. And +1 to that, Jackie. From my perspective, it is having that champion helps with procurement as well as helps with adoption. So I'd definitely vote for that. And Gabe, to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I'm on this crawl, walk, run. When it comes to your tech stack, think about that phrase: crawl, walk, run.
Panelists,
Very cool.
Venki is a moderator. Thank you all so much. It was amazing to sit back and hear you all jam. I feel like I could listen to you all chat for a few more hours. Thank you all so much for helping us kick off the start of 2021 Vision Week. This is a great foundational conversation. I have 4 pages worth of notes, so that's always a good sign. Venki, thank you so much for moderating. You did an amazing job. Panelists as well, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to share your amazing perspective with us. And for all of our folks that are in attendance right now, thank our sponsors, thank our speakers. You can chat with these folks in the Slack. And for those of you sticking around, we're going to be doing a virtual peer learning session on the future of RevOps. That's coming up at 11 Pacific. So see you all there. Panelist, moderator, thank you all so much, and have a wonderful day and stay safe.